Welcome to the Extracurriculars and Resume plus Resume Writing section of the workshop. So just a little bit about me. My name is Janene Kim. I'm from San Diego. I applied to 10 schools: SDSU, UCSD, UCLA, UC Berkeley, USC, Georgetown, Harvard, and Yale. And Stanford and Brown, of course. I was accepted into 7 of those being SDSU, UCSD, UCLA, UC Berkeley, USC, Stanford, and Brown. So I will be a member of Stanford 2025, so I actually am taking a gap year. If anybody has any gap year questions for me, feel free to ask them at the end. I know there's going to be a huge influx of gappers this year because of the coronavirus, potentially even next year. I hope not, but if any of you ever have any questions on that, please feel free to ask me. The major that I applied to Stanford with was public policy with a second concentration in international relations. I think I also applied for a political science for some schools, and I applied for a minor in French. Okay, so my personal extracurriculars are HOBY, which is the Hugh O'Brien Youth Leadership Program. So basically, this is a youth leadership program run across, I think it's globally actually, and it's basically just stressing empathy, collaboration, and understanding in leadership. So it's a program that runs for high school sophomores. So I attended that program as a sophomore, and then I came back to volunteer at multiple seminars across California the year after. I also won a Presidential Service Award for that by volunteering for the organization for more than 100 hours. The second extracurricular that took up most of my time, I would say, is orchestra. So I was a viola section leader of my school's top orchestra. I've been in orchestra my entire life, pretty much since I was like in the 3rd grade. I participated in multiple honors orchestras across my district, across my county. Orchestra was a huge part of my life. I was also a part of the more administrative part of orchestra. Let me just make sure that it's on the chat. Okay. I was also part of the more administrative part of orchestra. So I was a member of orchestra council since my freshman year. And then I slowly worked my way up to being treasurer. And I was also a liaison between our orchestras and the middle school orchestras in my district. With that, I planned a lot of like inter-orchestra concerts between all the levels of orchestra in my personal high school. I also traveled to the Kennedy Center. I traveled to Carnegie Hall. I gave performances at both of those places, and our school won golds at both of those places in various festivals. I also was in the San Diego Zoo Corps, which is a public speaking program here in San Diego through the San Diego Zoo. So basically it's where a bunch of teenagers go out into the zoo and we give public presentations to zoo guests about conservation, sustainability, saving species, endangered species, things like that. Beyond that, I was a Starbucks barista, still am, and I was a part of and held a leadership position in a variety of clubs at my school. I was the president of Academic League, which is kind of like an academic decathlon quiz bowl type club. I was also the vice president of People Who Serve, which is a service-based club in my community. I was the treasurer of prom committee, and I was also a part of class council. Beyond that, anytime I had any free time, I would volunteer at my local senior center. So that's just about my personal journey. So now we're going to move on to how to rank activities and write about them. So I personally have experience with the Common App application and the UC application. If you're an underclassman or you just don't really know about the difference between those two application types, the Common application is usually for your private schools. So it'll be your Ivy League schools like Stanford, Yale, Harvard, things like that. And then the UC application will of course be for your UC schools like UCSD, UC Berkeley, things like that. So the first thing that you need to know is that there are 10 activity slots on the Common App versus 20 slots on the UC application. The first piece of advice I have for you guys is that you do not need to fill all of these slots. In general, it's really about quality over quantity. I would say in general, the Common App is looking for really, really impactful super important extracurriculars because there's only 10 slots. And for the UC activity section, there's a lot more room for maybe activities that you didn't dedicate as much time to, but you still want to kind of list those. So to rank your activities, it would basically be ranked in order of importance, impact, and or hours committed. So importance is how important was it to shaping your identity as a student, your identity as a person. Impact would be basically like tangibly, like how much good did it do for your community, things like that. And hours committed would just be like literally the amount of hours that you dedicated to a specific activity. So you can rank in order of any of those. Basically, when the admissions officers receive your application, they're going to read top down. So you want to rank your activities in the order that you would like them to read your activities list, I guess. So a couple of questions to ask yourself to help you in the ranking process is, what are you most proud of? What are the activities that you truly are proud of doing and you would be happy to show them to anybody else? What are the extracurriculars that you're most passionate about? Maybe you really, really, really love running track and that's the thing that you dedicate the most time to. Also, what extracurricular is unique to you specifically? What do you think would set you apart from a pool of applicants who are doing similar things to you? What do you really think would stand out in a situation like that? So for writing the Common App and UC activities, there's a different character amount for each of those applications. So for the Common App, it's 150 characters, and for the UC app, it's 500 characters. 150 characters is not the same thing as 150 words, and it actually goes by really, really quickly. Like the character limit literally goes by so fast with just a couple sentences. So my recommendation is to write with sentence fragments and active verbs. Now we're gonna go over that in the later slides, but yeah, that's just like a main highlight of this slide is make sure you write all of your activities with sentence fragments and active verbs. You might know them as like resume writing type sentences. So yeah, and a big tip that I found when I was personally going through this process is when you're finishing or working on your UC applications first, make sure to save all of your activities descriptions on a separate Google Doc so you can edit them down for the Common App application, because it's a lot easier for you to edit down 500 characters to 150 characters. And it'll be super easy if you just have a separate Google Doc where you have access to all of that information. I'm going to answer some of these questions I see in the chat. Which of the schools I applied to were safety, reaches, and matches? Okay, I'm just going to go back super, super quick. So my safeties were pretty much SCSU and UCSD. My matches were UCLA, UC Berkeley, USC, and then my reaches were Georgetown, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and Brown. So there you go. Does participating in summer programs or internships count as extracurriculars? Internships, definitely. I would say, especially if it's like an ongoing thing. Summer programs do count as extracurriculars, but if they weren't super impactful for you, or if it didn't lead to like service work or anything like that, I don't know how high I would rank that. It's basically just like how much did it affect your life. For example, the Hobie program that I attended as a sophomore was a summer program before I started volunteering with it. So I actually split those off into two separate activities. So I did one activity was me volunteering for Hobie, and then another activity was me attending the actual program when I was younger. And I ranked that a lot lower on my list because I didn't think that it was that important. I'm starting an internship this year. Should I include it still? To Sherrod, I want to ask you, what year are you in? I feel like that's really important. Another tip for writing your activity sections is, I know we're not going to talk too much about essays in this specific workshop, but I definitely feel like if you're ever stuck on what to write for an essay, or you kind of have a mental block, it's super easy to start writing your activities sections first, because it's very cut and dry and it'll kind of ease you into writing about yourself in general. So the activity section honestly is the easiest part of your application, besides like filling out coursework and stuff like that. For Sherrod, I would definitely still include that. Again, it depends on how dedicated you are to that internship to see where you would rank it, but I definitely would still include that. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so here's an example, no problem. Here's an example of an activity slot on the UC application. So this is actually my application. I just really quickly grabbed a screenshot from it. So, so number one is an extracurricular activity, just a description, and then you're gonna go with the activity name. So I usually did the position name followed by the related organization. So I put viola section leader for the symphony orchestra. Then you're going to have an activity description. This is a UC application, so it's going to be 500 characters long. So mine, I know some of you might not be able to read it, sorry. It says, acted as the viola section leader for gold-winning performances at the Kennedy Center 2017 and Carnegie Hall 2019. Facilitated bi-weekly sectionals after school to make sure everyone felt comfortable with the content of the music. Scheduled one-on-one meetings with all members of the section to check up on their progress and discuss what areas they felt they could grow in. Worked with both a viola coach and the conductor to make appropriate fingering and bowing choices for the group. So in the little activity description of your activities, you want to make sure to highlight any related important milestones or events with the year in parentheses. So for example, I performed at Carnegie Hall in 2019 and I performed at the Kennedy Center in 2017. So I made sure to put those in parentheses because as a general rule of thumb, yes, when they're reading your activity description, they like to see a lot of qualitative work, like the things you did that can't be put into numbers, but they also like to see quantitative work. So by putting in those numbers, it kind of gives it more of like a solid footing, I guess, or it gives your activity a lot more credibility. So that's definitely something I recommend. They'll also ask you to put in your grade participation. So in general, the longer you've been working on an extracurricular is generally going to be or help you indicate what activities you found most important because you dedicated more of your high school life to that. That's not to say that you can't put in activities highly ranked that you just started in the 10th grade. It's just to say when you personally are sorting through all of your activities and all the things you've done, make sure to look out for things that you've had a long time commitment towards because colleges really love to see dedication and long time commitments. Mia says she's an editor-in-chief of my school newspaper. That's honestly really amazing. That's an amazing extracurricular that I would definitely rank really high. So good job, Mia. Yeah, again, listing the concrete things you've done and not only just listing the things you've done, but why you did them or what their impact was or their positive effects. That'll really help solidify your activity as something important, especially if you're in a leadership position. It's really important to detail what you did. And also, they'll ask you for your time commitment. So I said that I did 10 hours a week for 38 weeks per year. I think 38 weeks per year is the amount of time that I was physically going to school, like without breaks or anything. So if you guys want to just like take note of that weeks number, because I know I had to like literally sit there and like calculate how many weeks I was in school for. So 38 weeks per year is how much time I was in school. And you can just estimate this stuff. You don't have to have like an exact number or anything like that. I'm gonna start referring to the chat for a sec. So Alyssa says, I'm a president of a club at my school, but also coordinate a huge event in our community under that same club. Personally, I would put those, Alyssa, into the same activity description. I would put those under the same activity and rank it really high on your activity little section of your application. And I would also make sure to focus a lot of the 500 character count on that huge event because it seems really important. You can even put the amount of hours you're working on that activity, that specific event in your organizing that specific event in your activity description. So you can be like spent 500 hours organizing this specific thing for that specific club. You know what I mean? Should you split your extracurriculars into 2 spots? I don't necessarily know what that, should I split up? Honestly, Mia, that's up to you. It depends on how many extracurriculars you have. Like if you're running out of activity slots, you should think about combining similar activities under the same name. But if you have enough space, you can totally space it out if you want. Okay, let's see. Okay, so somebody sent me a private message about feeling like they're not doing enough. So let's just check back to my personal extracurriculars. As you can see, I didn't have any crazy awards. I didn't start a nonprofit. I didn't win like the National Science Fair. I didn't do anything like that. So honestly, I think the admissions officers are really just looking for a level of authenticity that you bring to your application and a level of well-roundedness. So honestly, if you're putting a lot of hours into extracurriculars that you truly love and are passionate about doing, it'll totally come through. And I know that the culture of comparison is really strong in high school and especially during college application season, but trust me, you're doing enough. You're doing enough, don't worry about it. Would it look bad if around 60% of my activities were started during my sophomore year? Honestly, no. My main advice, if you're an underclassman in this chat, is to really focus on exploring all of your different interests in maybe like the first year, 2 years of high school. And then once you find stuff that you like, make sure to stick with it. Because colleges understand that, you know, you're still figuring out stuff when you're young and you have a lot of diverse interests. Let's see. If you have too many extracurriculars in one area, for example, several orchestras, what's a good way to combine all of them into one extracurricular activity? So for Ellen Kim, the stuff that was kind of implied, I left out. So if I'm saying that I'm a viola section leader, I don't need to have another extracurricular saying that I'm a member of my orchestra. Does that make sense? Like stuff like that, like they'll just kind of naturally imply that on their own. And basically the way that I did it was I split up my orchestra extracurriculars into like all of the player work that I did. So like me being a section leader, me being a member, me like physically playing in all of these honors orchestras and stuff. And then I also had like an administrative orchestra type of activity where I was like talking about the leadership that work that I did, the planning of concerts, being a liaison between our school and the middle school, stuff like that. If you did 3 different internships at 3 different hospitals, if they're honestly super different, I would honestly just separate them. I feel like that would be a better way to go about it. Let's see. If I'm applying to public schools, should religious or religiously affiliated activities not be as high up? For Alyssa Garana, if you're spending a lot of time on these extracurriculars and they're really impactful for you and your application, like it makes sense for the major that you're applying to, or maybe it makes sense for the type of organizations that you want to join once you're on that college campus, I would definitely recommend ranking them high. It's basically just like, to you, what do you think are the most important things that you've done in your high school career? Do you think it's okay not to have any awards? I literally had like 1 national award and I had like multiple like small school awards for like GPA and stuff like that. I don't think it's necessary to have any super big awards. Do honors and awards count as extracurriculars? No, I don't think so. I think there are separate sections for those on both the Common App and the UC app. Will colleges think I spread myself too thin if all 10 of my activities involve committed leadership positions? Okay, this is a tricky one because in general, a college would love to see like 4 or 5 really committed and dedicated extracurriculars rather than 10 of them where you're like only doing like maybe like 2 hours a week or something like that. So it really depends on how much time and effort you're putting into all of those leadership positions. Like if they're not super, super impactful, I would still put them in there, but maybe just not rank them as high. Playing the piano definitely is a huge time commitment, and that's definitely a valid extracurricular. Yeah, you would put down the practice time. Yes, you would put down the practice time as the hourly commitments that you do in a week. And then you would just put all of like the competitions and all that stuff that you did into the activity description. So you'd be like, oh, like participated in multiple competitions for piano, won this award, won that award, things like that. So, I was picked to go on a fully paid student exchange program to Japan, but because of COVID, I wasn't able to go. What should I do? I would definitely try to find some type of, and this advice goes for everyone, by the way. This is something that I really want to stress. Just because of COVID, you do not need to stop your extracurricular activities, and there are definitely still opportunities for you to find. So you can definitely find different volunteer programs online. Some of these volunteer programs could be like writing to inmates, writing to your congressional district like representatives, writing to your mayor like about something that you would like to see impacted or like enacted in your city. But basically, you just want to show that despite COVID, despite all these hard challenges that you've gone through, you're still taking the time and effort to be proactive in your extracurriculars and really searching for those opportunities because they are out there. Hello, Dia. Thank you for the YouTube support. Quick question. Say I'm a researcher for a medical club and it's a pretty important leadership position to me, but I decide I don't want to go into the medical field. Will colleges count this or take this into account? No, honestly. Personally, I have a lot of different advice from other college YouTubers and other people that give college advice, in that I don't really believe in the idea of building such a strong spike towards only one major or only one career path. For me personally, I take being holistic and like being more well-rounded a lot more seriously, and that's something that I'm going to talk about in the later slides. So I will definitely talk about ranking your activities in accordance to like your ideal major or your ideal career path. For Anna Chen, no, I think you can put them in both, honestly, especially if they're really important competition awards. Do your extracurriculars have to match your major? Once again, that's something that I'm talking about super soon. For Celeste, yes, you can say that. Is being a campaign coordinator for Janene, yes, I would say that's an amazing extracurricular, even though you don't want to be in that type of major. Again, I'm going to talk about that super soon. Will you have access to these slides later? I can definitely send them to the team, and they can send it to you guys. Okay. I'm going to move on to the slides now. I promise I'll try to answer as many questions I can in a sec, but examples of an activity slot on the Common App. So I did one for the UC app, and here's one for the Common App. So the Common App basically looks super different from the UC app. So here are some screenshots, again, from my application last year. So this is one that I did for Hobie. On the Common App, they have actually this, it's only 150 characters, sorry. So my activity description for 150 characters were that I volunteered at the Hobie SoCal and Cal Central 2019 seminars, led group reflections and team bonding, fundraised $400, and set up program activities. So once again, I'm trying to use my numbers, the mention of the year 2019, the mention of the $400, stuff like that is really important. Now I'm going to show you the Common App and the UC activity description side by side. So what I'm talking about in this slide specifically is my Hobie extracurricular, where I volunteered as a junior crew member mentoring younger students at these leadership seminars. Oh, sorry. Oh my gosh. So for the Common App, my activity description was volunteered at the Hobie SoCal and Cal Central 2019 seminars, led group reflections and team bonding, fundraised $400, and set up program activities. For the UC application, they actually have a section in there for you to describe the organization that you worked for. So especially if it's something not super well known or it goes by an acronym such as Hobie, you want to actually spell that out and tell them what the organization is about. So I put Hugh O'Brien Youth Leadership Hobie is an organization that seeks to turn the young leaders of today into catalysts for positive, tangible change in their communities. Overall, Hobie stresses that a successful and good leader does not just have to fit into the usual type A and dominant personality type. The organization emphasizes that empathy and understanding are imperative in becoming a well-rounded leader. Hobie expands on the definition of who can be a leader and empowers kids to lead. And then the activity description that I put for that was volunteered as a junior counselor at both the Hobie SoCal 2019 seminar and the Hobie Cal Central 2019 seminar. Facilitated small group reflection discussions after panels and team bonding exercises in order to help my ambassadors grow in their definition of a leader. Shared personal experiences from my life and when I went through Hobie as an ambassador to personally connect with all the kids in my group. Fundraised $400 for Hobie and set up all group activities to ensure the weekend went smoothly. Okay, so now we're going to talk about spike and well-roundedness. So here's my opinion on that. This is what a bunch of people were asking in the chat about, like, oh, should I focus on extracurriculars that only apply to my major and all of that stuff. So my biggest piece of advice is to pursue what you're passionate about, but not at the expense of everything else. So don't just do something because you think it will look good on an application, because the admissions officers, this is not their first rodeo. They can definitely tell when someone is being disingenuous or forcing themselves into extracurriculars that look good only on paper. And you can always figure out how to write about your activities in a way that creates a full story / cohesive theme later. Once again, this is an extracurricular workshop, so I'm not going to talk about too much about like the full presentation of your application, but the main gist of it is you want to create a cohesive image of who you are to present or put your best foot forward to admissions officer. This means like showing off a complete image of who you are, and if you're just building all these extracurriculars towards one spike for one major and one career path, they're not going to get a cohesive picture of who you are. My advice personally for this question, or spike versus well-roundedness, that whole debate, is to think about multiple different activities that work on the same traits you want to show, but not necessarily things that would be expected for a specific major. For example, in my case, I was applying for a more humanities-based pre-law path, so I was intending to major in things like public policy, political science, international relations. So what are the common extracurriculars for a path like that? It would be mock trial, gym UN, debate team, things like that. I did none of the above. Instead of that, I did the San Diego Zoo Corps, Hobie, and focusing on conscious inclusivity as an academic league president. So all of those activities, while they're not traditionally geared towards my major or my career path as a pre-law major, they all show a strong inclination towards public speaking and advocating for those without a voice. And both public speaking and advocating for those without a voice are highly desirable for my major and my career path, but they don't necessarily like specifically line up with being a lawyer or being this or being that. So those were just extracurriculars that I genuinely loved and enjoyed doing. And I have to tell you, when I started doing all of my extracurriculars, I never thought about like, oh my God, like, is this going to look good on a college app? I genuinely just pursued what I was interested in. And I feel like that was a huge contributor in my success to applying to schools, as well as my friends and like the other people that I've known who got into the schools that they wanted to go to. So I'm gonna look back at the chat for some of more questions. If I did a competitive sport as an extracurricular for 9 years, but I quit in 9th grade, can I still put that for college applications, or is this too far back? Honestly, that's an amazing thing, but I don't know if I would put it on a college application unless it was a really big part of your high school career, because they mainly want to see the work that you've done from 9 through 12 in terms of grades. So I would, if you have space to rank it in the UC app, which has 20 slots, for example, I would put that at the very end. But once again, even if the UC application has 20 slots, if you don't have 20 impactful, super important extracurriculars that you're passionate about, I wouldn't even bother putting it on there, honestly. If most of my extracurriculars are from the end of my junior year to my senior year, would that be bad? Once again, no, I don't think so. As long as you're super dedicated and committed to them and you're passionate about them, I don't think it's a super huge deal. But for my younger folks, in general, the earlier you start an extracurricular, the stronger it'll come off as. So if you find something when you're really young, like in the 9th grade, that you're super passionate about and you're like, wow, I could see myself spending a lot of time to this organization or to this position, I would definitely try to stick with that for as long as you can. What did I write my personal statement and other supplementals on? So for me personally, I feel like the strongest part of my application were my essays and supplementals. I don't know if I'm going to have a lot of time to talk about that in this specific workshop. We'll see how much time we have at the end, but yeah, sorry about that. If we are already planning to write about a certain extracurricular as a PIQ or supplemental essay, should we still include it in the extracurricular section in each application? Yes, 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 yes. Basically, anything that you would write about in one of your college essays, anything that's that important to write about, you should definitely rank those high. So I wrote an essay about my experience in San Diego Zoo Corps and my presidency as the president of Academic League, and I wrote about Hobie. So those 3 activities that I wrote about in my actual college essays themselves, I ranked those as like the first 3 activities in the actual activities section, because it just leads to a more cohesive application. It just is more polished of a presentation, I guess. For younger people, are there any tips on finding these extracurriculars that you might be interested in? Honestly, Google was my best friend for finding like extracurricular activities outside of school. I think that's also one way that you can really make your application stand out, is if you find opportunities outside of school. For example, San Diego Zoo Corps was a really big opportunity for me that did not exist in my high school, for example. For younger people, I definitely actually, if hobby is something that interests you, Hugh O'Brien Youth Leadership, and like empathy and understanding in leadership, compassion and leadership, things like that, I definitely also look into applying for hobby. You can find that online. That was something, honestly, that really has given me a lot of positive memories, and that I can put on nearly any college activity little section or resume. It's something that's come in handy for me over the years. Basically, I would say if there are clubs that interest you at school, don't be afraid of just joining those clubs, just literally going to random meetings and sitting in. I know for me, I had a lot of like social anxiety regarding joining clubs at my school, because they always seem to be really like intense and like kind of focused towards upperclassmen. But that's one thing that I talked about a lot in the essay that I wrote about being president for Academic League. I talked about how I wanted to make the club a lot more accessible for those with social anxiety, and for those who maybe were not as confident about joining an academic decathlon type team. So I definitely feel like just pursuing the things that, even like the random things that you might have like a interest in, even if you don't think that it'll lead to a career path or a certain major, things like that. Do I have any advice on the short answers for the USC application? For those questions, there are a couple short answer questions on the Stanford app as well as the USC one. I'm just going to answer this question super quick because I know that we're not really talking about stuff like that. But my advice for those is really just don't try too hard. Yeah, basically just like don't try too hard to present like a super academic, or like don't try to present who they think or who you think they want you to be. Just try to present authentically. So for example, a lot of schools will ask you like, what are your favorite books that you've read, blah 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 blah. You don't have to put like Wuthering Heights, or like you don't have to put like Animal Farm. Like you definitely can if those are things that interest you, if the classics are generally things that you love reading, like that would be perfectly fine to put. But honestly, like I think I put like Harry Potter Goblet of Fire, like things like that, like books that I genuinely loved reading, because they can definitely tell if you're like trying too hard on those little short answer sections, because those are all about your personality. They're trying to get to know you on a very personal and fun level. Those are not supposed to be super intense. Okay. Let's see. How did I find hobby? Because I'm interested in things like that. So as I mentioned before, I was actually on the class council of my school, and there was a hobby representative who came to talk to my class about it, and I applied through my school. But you can also apply online, I think, but you'll have to raise your own fundraising fee. I think it's about like I'm not sure how much it is, honestly, but I know a lot of people that have fundraised to get themselves over there. You can definitely apply online or look into it online. But yeah, it's mainly just like any opportunity that falls in your lap that you think you would be interested in, just go for it. Just go for it, just apply. Like even if you're not 100% confident, the worst thing that can happen is they say no, or the worst thing that can happen is you don't get an email back from a certain application. But it's really about taking those opportunities in stride and just trying to figure out what you want to do later in life, maybe, or what your interests are. I'm not saying that you have to necessarily find out what your major is in high school, because I definitely don't believe in that. And and the admissions officers also know that you're very unlikely to pick a major and stick with it when you're so young. That's another reason why I'm kind of against the idea of building a spike, is because there are very few people that 100% know what they're going to do when they're applying to college, and the admissions officers definitely know that and are considerate of that. So, yep. Now we're gonna get on to resume writing. Resume writing as a student might not seem that important to you guys, but honestly, it really, 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 really is. Another thing I'm gonna talk about is a job as an extracurricular. A job as an extracurricular, I feel like, in my personal opinion, is one of the best things that you can do to strengthen your college application, because there are just so many things that you learn from working a service job or working a minimum wage job or working any type of job that you would not learn through the traditional high school extracurriculars. Also, there are going to be questions that ask you like, oh, what did you do last summer? And having a job is great for answering those type of questions. It also shows them a lot about your ability to balance your work and your school life. And it's just a really valuable extracurricular that I feel like everybody should be working towards, is having a job. So when you apply to jobs, obviously you need a resume, and even applying for internships or anything like that. So here are my tips for resume writing. There are plenty of free templates that you can search for on Google Docs and Microsoft Word. For me specifically, I would actually recommend doing your resume on Microsoft Word, because when you're emailing people about internships or jobs or things like that, it's just so much easier to attach like a Microsoft Word file, and it's just a lot easier to like send off, I guess. My advice would be to choose something aesthetically pleasing but not overwhelming or hard to read. So you want it to look nice, of course, but it shouldn't be like so flowery and like embellished that you can't really find the information that you need to access super readily. How did I get my job as a Starbucks barista? Is there an age limit, and did I need previous experience as a barista? So I think the age limit to work in California was 16. So I got my job, I think at 16. Did I need previous experience as a barista? No, I did not. I did not have any work experience prior to working at Starbucks. So because I had no prior experience, my resume when applying to Starbucks was basically all of my volunteer work, all of my extracurriculars, all of my schoolwork. That's what I put on my resume. And I applied to the job through, I think I found it on Indeed, and then I just set up an interview, and then I did that. Another thing that's important to keep in mind with your resume writing is that it should be 1 page max. Like, nobody is going to read a resume that's more than 1 page. And I know that sounds super harsh, but I'm just trying to keep it completely real with you guys so you can chase the bag. Nobody will read your resume if it's longer than a page, especially if you're a student. Also, do not put your photo on there, because a lot of jobs have things about like hiring bias and stuff like that. You don't want your photo anywhere on there. Make sure to include all of your vital contact information, such as your cell phone and email. Also, when you're applying for jobs and they're starting to get back to you, make sure to like answer phone calls from people that you don't know. I know that seems like such common sense, but I still am honestly the type of person to not answer a phone call if they're not saved in my phone. But obviously, when somebody is contacting for you for a job, you wouldn't have their phone number saved. You know what I mean? So yeah, things to put on your resume: job experience, volunteer work, education, and your cumulative GPA. Also your graduation year and any leadership positions you have. As for ranking the stuff that you've done in a resume, make sure to do it in chronological order, but going from what you've done most recently. So you're gonna, near the top of your resume, underneath your name, you would put the stuff that you've done most recent to least recent, or the stuff that you did like the most recent in time should be first. Again, you're going to want to use sentence fragments and action verbs because you don't have a lot of space on a resume. You want to bring your resume to every single job interview and every single college interview that you have scheduled, even if they don't ask for it. So in response to Rupa Bali, yes, I brought my resume to every single college interview, even if they don't ask for it, and always make sure to offer it. So like, I would sit down at my interview with my interviewer from the college and be like, hi, nice to meet you. I know that you didn't really request a resume from me, but I just wanted you to have this just for your viewing, I guess. Like just tell them like, oh, I know you didn't ask for it, but I just brought one just in case, just to be prepared. Also, having a resume printed out with you really, really, really comes in handy before a college interview. Like literally in the 10 minutes before a college interview, maybe your parent is driving and you're in the rear you see and you just want to prepare a lot for your college interview, having that resume really helps you like have an overview of your extracurriculars so you know what to talk about and you don't blank when you're giving your college interview. I can also talk about college interviews for a little bit if we get to the end of this. In terms with in response to Leia, they're really trying to prevent like race bias, gender bias, even though they can tell your gender from your name sometimes. But yeah, they don't want to have any external factors going into the hiring process that aren't your achievements or your awards or your education. They're trying to keep it like pretty fair. So yeah, your resume is extremely handy, so put time and effort into making it look good. Like I would literally, this weekend, if you guys are free, I would literally just block out an hour or two of time and really focus on making a resume that's really good, because this is something that you are going to be sending to a lot of employers and bringing to college interviews, things like that. So it's better for you to just take a lot of time into doing it right once rather than having to like revise it a bunch over the course of your senior year. So here's summary and overall advice. The first piece of advice is quality over quantity when talking about activities in the UC application, common application, any college application. Make sure you're using sentence fragments and action verbs to save space and character count on those applications. That also goes for resumes. Make sure you're using sentence fragments and action verbs. It's better to have a few extracurriculars that you're extremely dedicated to rather than a bunch that you don't really care about. Honestly, if it's something that you don't care about, don't even bother putting it on the college application. It'll just waste time. Your interviewer, it won't make a difference that much to your interviewer. Pursue what you're passionate about. For all of my younger folks in here, if you're going to high school or maybe you're a freshman or you're a sophomore, make sure you spend a lot of time exploring your diverse interests. Don't feel like you have to be pigeonholed into one type of extracurricular for your entire high school experience. It's never too late to start something new. Work on a variety of activities that strengthen a similar theme rather than building a spike. So once again, I talked about that a little bit in the spike versus well-roundedness slide, but you just want to have activities that kind of work on strengthening a certain skill set or a certain group of traits rather than like, I'm going to do all of these things that make sense for an engineering major, or I'm going to do only CS extracurriculars because I know that I only want to do CS. Like you might want to only do CS right now, but there's a very high likelihood that that might change through the application process while you're in your beginning years of college, and your admissions officers know that. They don't expect you to have 100% clarity on what you want to do. And then the last point that I really want to stress, I don't know how many of you here have watched my YouTube or are subscribed to my YouTube, but this is something that I really like to stress in my YouTube videos, is that you don't need crazy awards or competitions in order to get into a good school. Those are always a plus, but as long as you're doing really impactful work that you find meaning behind, you're set. Now I got to the end of my slideshow, so we have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to stay on here for longer if you guys need me to, but I'm going to open the question floor. So any questions that you have, it can be on extracurriculars, it can be on essays, it can be on a gap year, it can be on anything you want. I'm really here to help you guys. Also, if you have any other questions that aren't answered in here, I'm always free to answer them either via my Instagram, via my email, or also if you just want an overview of my stats and my extracurriculars, you can head over to my YouTube, which is just Janene. But I'm going to be answering some questions now, so keep them coming. Should we fill out all 10 extracurriculars for the Common App? For Michelle, yes. Honestly, I think that you should if you have enough activities that are important to you. I filled out all 10 on the Common App, and I think I filled out about like 13 or something on the UC application. How do I narrow down my extracurriculars for junior year, since I have done them for many years and it's hard to let them go? For Jacqueline, you don't need to narrow them down if they're really important to you and if you really are passionate about them and you're still active in them right now. You don't need to narrow them down. My advice, like when I talk about quality, not quantity, I'm saying like if you have a bunch of extracurriculars that you don't really care about, then those are the ones that I would definitely cut. But if you are passionate about all of your extracurriculars, definitely go ahead, put them on. For extracurriculars, are you competing against your peers or people in your area? So to answer Rebecca's question, I'm not sure if this is the same for every single school, but a lot of the schools that I apply to, such as Stanford and most of the private schools, you're not going up, or you're not being compared to every single student across the world. You're being compared to the students in your area, like your geographical location. So there's an admissions officer for like San Diego, for example, and he's responsible for figuring out who gets accepted from San Diego. So when you are curating your college application, you just need to keep in mind like how you would kind of, I don't want to say stack up, because like I don't really want to encourage the culture of comparison in the college apps, but this is just how it is, like from my experience. You're being compared to like the people that are applying to the same school from your school, like from your high school. You're being compared to them as well as the other high schools in your area. So a lot of people always ask me like, oh, my school doesn't offer APs, my school doesn't offer IB classes, like what do I do? And honestly, they just want to see that you're taking advantage of all the opportunities that are in your area, that are available to you. So if your school doesn't offer APs, that's fine. But if your school offers, for example, dual credit college enrollment classes, go ahead and do that. You know what I mean? Could you explain more about college interviews? Yes, I will, because college interviews were not something that were really explained to me well, and I wish that they were. So college interviews are normally given by private colleges, private universities. I think there are a couple UCs that do them if you're kind of like borderline or if they want to learn more about you. But a lot of the private universities do offer college interviews. A lot of them are optional, but honestly, my advice is do every single college interview that is offered to you, because it can only, if you interview right, it can only be a plus, and it's never really going to be a negative unless you really bomb the interview, are rude to your interviewer, things like that. It's really easy to have an okay interview, but it's harder to have a great interview, if that makes sense. So about college interviewers, the interviewer who is interviewing you is most likely going to be an alumnus or alumna from the institution. So they probably went to school like there like 20 years ago or something like that. They usually ask you to meet up at either their place of work or a coffee shop somewhere public. At these interviews, I would obviously bring my resume. I would dress kind of on the nicer end of casual. Like for ladies, I think I wore like a nice blouse and some slacks and some flats. Just make sure that you look presentable, you feel good in what you're wearing, things like that. Make sure that you have questions that you want to ask them at the end about the school to show them that you're really engaged and really committed to going to that school. So be like, oh, what was your favorite tradition when you were going to school? Like, what was your favorite memories attending XYZ school? I plan on applying to USC. Do I have any advice? I know that the USC application, there's a question on there that specifically asks why USC. So why USC is actually a really important question, as is any why XYZ school. They really, really, really want to see that you've done your research. So make sure you go on the website, you find professors that you're interested in their research, make sure you find specific classes that you're interested in taking. Maybe there are some clubs that are offered at that school that can be found anywhere else. I think for USC, when I was answering that question, I talked about the USC debate team and how they were one of the best in the country. And I talked about wanting to strengthen my skills in debate, things like that. Just make sure that you have a lot of research that is specific to that one school, because they want to see really specific stuff. Don't say stuff like, I'm excited to go to the football games. Like, for example, if I was applying to Stanford, I would be like, I'm excited to go to the big game versus Berkeley because of the unique student spirit that Stanford garners, something like that. Like you want to make sure that it's really, really, really specific. I've also seen a lot of people write that question in terms of like what an ideal day at an institution would look like for them. So let's say you're applying to USC, you're like, oh, I wake up at this time in this dorm. I go to the dining hall to meet up with my friends. We talk about our diverse interests, things like that. After class, I go to like, I don't know, go to my research position at this specific building, things like that. what did I write for my personal statement? So on the Common App, there's one really long essay that gets sent out to every single college. It's about 650 words. For that essay, I think I wrote about my experience as the daughter of genocide refugees from Cambodia and how that really has like shaped my worldview and like my perspective on the way that I live my life. And I talked about, in that essay, I talked a lot about grit and about like finding comfort in like being uncomfortable or finding or kind of thriving in situations where I don't 100% know what I'm doing, I guess. I wrote a lot about that. For my UC essays, I wrote about actually I have them right here. Let me show you guys. Okay, so if you want to see what my little planning document looked like for the UCs, this is what it looks like. Oh my God, I don't know if you can see. Hold on. Let's see. Well, I don't think I can show you, but basically it looks like I would just copy all of the prompts down onto a Google Doc, and I would highlight the ones that I was interested in doing, and then I would just start note-taking and like word vomiting. For one of the questions that said on the UC application was, what would you say is your greatest talent or skill? How have you developed and demonstrated that talent over time? So basically how I wrote all of my essays was in the introduction of my essay, I would have some type of like quirky personal anecdote that was really impactful for me. So for this essay, my introduction was literally about how my greatest talent was making cheesy mashed potatoes during Thanksgiving time. And then in the body of my paragraph, I expanded on whatever that quirky anecdote meant to me in a larger sense. So yes, my greatest talent, I said, was making cheesy mashed potatoes, but in the body of my paragraph, I talked about why. I said, like, why I find that that is my greatest talent is because I love to bring people together. I love to bring people together through not only making cheesy mashed potatoes, but also through conscious inclusivity. And I talked about my experience as a president of Academic League. And I talked about Zoo Corps, how I love to unite families together through education concerning sustainability and conservation. I talked about how I love to bring people together with my extracurriculars in the same sentiment that I was bringing people together with making mashed potatoes. And then in the conclusion of my essay, I wrote about like the larger theme, I really drove home the fact that the thing I love to do most is to bring together completely different people from completely different walks of life by finding the things that they have in common. And that was how I pretty much wrote all of my essays. I really stuck to that structure very, very, very heavily. What kind of questions did I ask the Stanford interviewer? I think I asked her, I was like, what were your favorite traditions that you've experienced at Stanford? What was your favorite things that you've done at Stanford? Basically, like, here's a little psychology hack for you guys. Ending the conversation with what was your favorite thing to do at blank university is probably one of the strongest psychological tricks that you can use on somebody, because when you ask that question, they're thinking about all of the most positive memories that they've had at that school. And because you're the one that asked them, they're going to be associating the positive memories or the positive feelings associated with those memories to you. So that way, like, even if they don't necessarily remember the exact things that you said in the interview, they'll remember that you left them with a really, really positive feeling, and they're more inclined to write you a really positive recommendation or like interview summary. How do interviews for international students work? To Peach, I think there's an interviewer in a lot of different countries and a lot of different areas. If you physically cannot go to an interview, like because they're too far away from you or whatever, that will not count as a negative against you. So I wouldn't worry about that as an international student. Like, obviously, if you can go, but if you can't, don't sweat it. Thank you for Alyssa. Thank you for complimenting my essay topic. It was actually like really fun to write. I think once you start kind of getting into the hang of writing essays and like you find a format that works for you, I think essay writing can actually be really fun because you're writing about the things that you love most. You're writing about the things that you spent so many years working on, and it's actually a fun process once you kind of start to embrace it. I know that sounds so crazy right now saying that to you guys, but yeah. I had one more piece of advice. Oh, one piece of advice for time management when writing your essays. This is something that just randomly came to me. If you are the type of person that likes to write essays with music, things like that, make sure that you like curate or take like literally just take one night after school to curate a playlist of all the songs that you want to hear during the time that you're writing your essays. Because for me, I'm already kind of a procrastinator, I guess, and like I would literally like open my laptop to work on my essays, and I would just be like spending 30 minutes like trying to find a song that like would give me the right vibes for writing my essay. And honestly, that was like such a waste of time. I wish I didn't do that. So definitely make literally a Spotify playlist, a YouTube playlist of all the songs that you want to hear while you're writing your essay. And then when you're writing your essay, turn that on and just plug away. Do all applicants get an interview? I think all applicants who have somebody in, like who have an interviewer in their area gets an interview for private schools. For public schools, I've heard, don't quote me on this, but I've heard that they give interviews to people that they want to learn more about, or maybe they're kind of unsure of whether or not to accept or deny their application. So those are the type of people who are more inclined to get an interview. But at private schools, pretty much everybody is getting an interview, I'd say. But not everyone elects to take it. But once again, oh my gosh. Once again, my advice would be to take as many interviews that are offered to you. From Michelle, what advice do you have for managing all extracurricular schoolwork and college app when school starts? Okay, so I'm going to, so this is kind of a tough question for me to answer, because I definitely am, I would say, like, during the school season, I can definitely neglect my mental health a lot, and I definitely, like other college and high school students, fall victim to the stress culture that exists in the academic system. Just a little bit about my personal college application journey. I did not balance it very well, honestly. I had so many extracurricular kind of commitments, and I was taking really, really hard classes. I was taking classes at my local community college while being enrolled in high school. I was taking a bunch of upper level math classes when I don't even really like math. So it was really kind of rough. Like, school was hard. School itself was hard for me, which was kind of difficult because I was also balancing work. So basically, I did not start working on my college apps. Like, the UC applications, I started and finished them during Thanksgiving break, like the week before they were due. And then for all of my private schools, I did them all during winter break, like 2 weeks before they were due. And honestly, like, I do not recommend that. Like, I recommend you guys to start a lot sooner. I'm not saying you have to start right now, because I honestly don't really believe that you do. Like, I feel like having a month to write your essays, I feel like it's a really good time slot, at least for me. Obviously, it depends on how comfortable you are with writing, things like that, how many people you want to get it revised by. But my advice is start at least 1 or 2 months before they're due. Your college apps are due. Make sure you're just working on it little by little, day by day. And then my other advice is you honestly need to find things to, like, self-care activities that really work for you. So for me, I started recently discovering like creative writing, poetry, reading, taking naps. Taking naps were a vital part of my high school experience, honestly. I am a very, very, very solid advocate for the midday nap. Playing the viola, I loved. You also need to find extracurriculars that you genuinely enjoy doing, so that they don't become a burden to you. So for me, for example, orchestra was a huge part of my life. It was a huge time commitment. I would have rehearsals sometimes from 2 to 9 o'clock, but because I was surrounded by peers that I enjoyed being with, and because I genuinely enjoyed playing the viola, it didn't seem like a burden to me. Like, I was happy to do those things. Even though I was exhausted, I was still enjoying myself. And I feel like that's really the mentality that you want to be in order to survive high school, your senior year, college app season, everything like that. I also recommend having the right amount of people read your college essays, read and revise them. So I recommend having people that are really close to you read your college essays, people who are not afraid to step on your toes and give you constructive criticism, people who are not afraid to call you out. So like, for example, I had my sister read my college essays, and I think her friend from Stanford was also visiting during Thanksgiving break, and I just had him read it real quick, and that was it. Like, I didn't really ask for a lot of advice from outside sources, because your college essay should be your own voice, and it should be representative of who you are, not other people's perception of you. It should be the type of person that you want to put forward to the admissions officer. And at the end of the day, you know yourself best, and you really want to preserve that unique sense of voice in your writing. Other than that, my last piece of college advice during the season, two pieces of advice actually. The first piece of advice is be prepared for your friends around you to kind of be on edge. Like, college advice or college application season is a highly, highly, highly stressful time. So just remember to be kind and gentle to not only yourself, but the people around you. So just make sure to be considerate to other people around you and yourself. Just try to go with the flow, as stressful as I know it can be. I know it's super stressful, and I am sorry that you guys have to go through it in such a weird time in the world, but you know, what can you do? Also, the second piece of advice is sometimes you just have to say yes to things. This is like, okay, so a lot of times when, especially during my senior year leading up to college app season, a lot of people would be like, oh my god, like I can't go to our last homecoming game on Friday, like I can't go, like it'll put me behind, like blah 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 blah, like I have so much college app work to do, blah 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 blah. But at the same time, like, yes, do not procrastinate to the point of stressing yourself out. But at the same time, you need to like have spontaneous events that make you feel like a kid again. Because at the end of the day, like, you're in high school, you're a teenager, you're supposed to be having fun. Like, make sure that you always have that balance, because burning yourself out is not going to help on your college applications. It just won't. Like, make sure that you're leading a balanced and healthy lifestyle. What scholarships did I apply to? So, when I was going through the application process, I didn't really apply for any scholarships, but I applied to some after. I was just applying to like random ones after. I was literally like going on Google and just like searching up like scholarships. But my advice on scholarships is to apply to the ones that are offered in your local community, because you're a lot more likely to get those ones. I know that Questbridge is a really good scholarship for first generation low income, as is the Koch Scholar one. I think there's a Ronald Reagan scholarship that's also really good. But the thing is, also, if you guys are interested in applying to the UCs and SCSU, I think as well, sometimes you're entered into scholarships, or you actually are entered into scholarships even though you don't apply for them. So I think I received a Regent scholarship at UCSD for merit, just because they saw my GPA and they saw my stats and they were like, oh, we want her. So they just straight up offered me a scholarship. Same thing with SCSU. SCSU offered me a full scholarship for merit that I didn't apply to. They just gave it to me because of stats and GPA and stuff like that. So there are some schools that will straight up just offer you scholarship money. When should you start applying for scholarships? If you are really, really, really depending on scholarships to pay for the bulk of your education, I recommend on applying to them right now. Like, try to apply to them as soon as possible, because a lot of good scholarships have really early deadlines, and they require a lot of letters of recommendation, a lot of letters from your counselor, things like that. So make sure you apply to those early if you're really, really, really depending on those to pay for your college education. What is my SAT, ACT score? My SAT score, I took it one time. I scored a 1570 out of 1600. And I think on the essay section, oh gosh, I think I scored like, maybe like a 19 out of 24, 20 out of 24, something like that. But I can definitely answer some short questions about SAT, ACT score. It is 4:30, but honestly, I'm gonna stay on here for like 10 more minutes or something, just because I'm enjoying answering some of these questions, and I just want to answer as many as you guys have. I'm in band, and we usually spend upwards of 20 hours a week. But with COVID, our season is canceled. For Genevieve, they honestly ask for like an estimated amount of your hours. So you can just like estimate the hours that you've been doing all throughout the activity. And then I wouldn't really mention, like, I think everyone at this point pretty much knows that COVID is going to be a big factor in your college application. So I don't think you really have to talk too much about how COVID reflected that. I know it's hard because all the comps are canceled and stuff. Yeah, that's a really hard one. If I would say if you're still working on bands for like a reasonable amount of hours a week, I would just apply like normally or write about it like how you normally would outside of COVID, because that's not something that was really your fault. Like that's kind of out of your control. How did I study for the SAT, and do I have tips for taking the SAT? I took a SAT prep class the summer before my junior year, I think. Yeah, I took an SAT prep class the summer before my junior year, and honestly, like, I sacrificed an entire summer for that test. Like, I'm not even gonna lie to you, like, I went to class 3 days a week. Like, when I wasn't at class, I was at home, I was studying. I really, really, really worked hard for my score in that test. I don't believe that you need to necessarily go to class for it or like pay for class, but just speaking for my personal experience, it was incredibly, incredibly helpful for me to go to class for the SAT, because I'm the type of student that thrives off of routine, and having a routine for studying really, really, really helped me increase my score. So my advice for the SAT is take as many practice tests as you can possibly find. Like literally take as many practice tests as you can possibly find and take them under the right conditions. So make a simulation for yourself and act as if you're taking the test for real. Don't take any breaks that you wouldn't be taking if you were actually taking the SAT. Do you know what I mean? Make sure to have no distractions. Like, make sure to print out your test so you like know, because bubbling answers honestly takes so long, and you need to get used to like the time crunch, factoring in the amount of time that it takes you to bubble. So print out your SAT tests and do them on paper, and also grade them and try to find patterns in what you're getting wrong and work on those sections. So I've always been somebody that's more inclined towards reading, writing, grammar. So those sections weren't really as hard for me. Someone's asking how to improve the reading section for the SAT. How to improve the reading section is literally by reading more. Like that really helps me a lot. Like not even reading like super complicated works, but just like a YA novel, like reading like small short stories like The Yellow Wallpaper. And also to improve reading sections is there's a lot of strategies that you can learn through SAT classes that are free on Khan Academy or stuff, and they'll teach you literally how to take the test. So like, for example, there are a lot of two-part questions. If you don't know the answer to the first part, like try to go on to the second part and like work backwards, if that makes sense. There's a lot of stuff, like there's a lot of like little tricks and tips that I learned in my SAT classes that I'm sure you can also find online, but it's also like circling any like contrast words. So if you're reading a passage and all of a sudden you see a word such as but or however or anything like that that indicates contrast, you really want to circle that and take note of it, because you know that like there will probably be a question talking about the tone shift between the section before that transition word and the section after that transition word. So you really need to like have those markers in big blocks of text, so that way when you're trying to skim through the text reading for answers for the questions, you know like the important parts that they're more likely to answer or ask questions on, if that makes sense. Sorry. The section that I personally struggled with a lot was no calculator math. So the SAT tests on, I think the highest level of math that they go up to is pre-calc, I think, or maybe, yeah, I think it's pre-calc. So they're going to be testing you a lot on math concepts that you learned in middle school. So obviously you haven't touch those concepts in a really long time if you're taking the SAT as a junior or a senior. So you really need to brush up on those really old middle school concepts like algebra, basic geometry, things like that. How did I find other practice tests before the 10 test for College Board that College Board offers. A lot of my practice tests were through the test prep agency that I was taking classes from, but I know you can take some from Khan Academy. There are some free ones. If you guys are interested in like review books for SAT, ACT, AP classes, my favorite series has always been the Princeton review books. I love, love, love Princeton review books. So there are also tests that you can find in there. Alyssa Garana says, did all of your essays start with like a small metaphor or anecdote like your mashed potato story? Yes, they all did start like that, just because I'm really a story narrative driven writer. Like that's just the way that I tend to write. A lot of people are a lot more cut and dry in that they directly answer the question and they write to the question. But for me, I like to write more of a complete narrative. So let's see. Like another essay that I wrote was describe an example of your leadership experience in which you have positively influenced others, helped resolve disputes, or contributed to group efforts over time. So I'll read you like the little introduction that I wrote for this. I said, step across the line if you have both been bullied and been the bully, the leadership seminar chair says. I face my ambassadors and hesitate. Last year when I was in their shoes, I did not step forward on this prompt, but now they look to me for a special type of courage. I take one step, crossing into different worlds, leaving behind the tough carapace that once shielded me for naked authenticity. I owe it not only to myself, but to the future young leaders in front of me to be daring. And then in my body of my essay, I expanded more about my specific work that I did through Hobie and through Hugh O'Brien Youth Leadership. And then in my conclusion, I talked about how, I said, I stepped across the line to show my ambassadors that it is okay to make mistakes and it is normal to have been less than perfectly moral. Everyone is quick to recognize injustices committed against them, but very few are able to self-evaluate and realize that they too have been the bully. By taking that initial step, I acknowledge that in order to grow, I must look at myself in the mirror and recognize how I have failed others and myself. I then led a group debrief. My ambassadors relented and told me about how they too wanted to step forward but were afraid of how others would judge them. We discussed how having the courage to be honest and authentic with others, but especially ourselves, eventually pushes society as a whole to do better and be better. Together, we began to think of a leader not as the stoic type A person dominating all their team members, but rather someone who seeks to cultivate the growth in others through empathy, understanding, and cooperation. There is strength and vulnerability. So that last line, there is strength and vulnerability, I made sure to insert a similar line at the end of every single one of my essays that really drove home the theme that I was referring to in my entire essay. So that, once again, is another example of an essay that I wrote. How much do I think my math class affected my college acceptance? For example, my school only offers up till calculus my senior year, and I can only take pre-calculus senior year. Is it fine if I take calculus or higher classes at a local community college? Will colleges count this? Honestly, okay, so I finished calculus. Okay, so here's my math journey, I guess. I took advanced integrated 2 or 3 my freshman year, and then I took honors pre-calculus my sophomore year, and then I jumped to AP Calculus BC my junior year, and then my senior year, I took multivariable calculus and linear algebra through a local community college. And honestly, even though I really hated taking math classes, that was, I feel like, one of the strongest parts of my application because, number one, I was applying as a humanities major. So honestly, I wasn't really expected to do really hard math, you know what I mean? Number two, I knew that I didn't like math, but I wanted to take math in order to challenge myself and in order to have, like, to cultivate the amount of grit and determination it would take to get through activities that I didn't like. Because obviously in college, you're not going to be taking classes that you love 100% of the time. You're going to have to learn how to take classes that you don't enjoy. And I really wanted to kind of force myself into that kind of mindset by taking those hard college classes. So that's something that I really, really, really stress in all of my interviews. And all of my interviews were super impressed by that, honestly. So I think that if your school does not offer math and you want to take higher levels of math, taking it through a community college is an amazing option, and I really think that you should explore that. What am I majoring in at Stanford? So currently, my major is public policy, and my intended career path is hopefully going to law school and either and becoming a lawyer. at Stanford, we don't have to declare our majors until the end of our sophomore year, and I will be taking a gap year, so I have a little bit more time to think about it. But yeah, I am just waiting for some last minute questions, and if you guys don't have any more questions, I'm going to be ending the chat soon. But also, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me either on Instagram or through my email. I am super excited and happy to help anybody in the college process because I was there. I know how stressful it can be. But yeah, if anybody has, for my college credits, did I mention them in my interviews or in your college application activities as well? I mentioned my college credits in my interviews. I also mentioned them in my essays, and I mentioned them in my class section of the application. It's hard to explain, but basically they ask you to detail all the classes that you've ever taken. There's space for you to put those in, so I just put those in and I just left them there. I didn't put them in the activity section though. For Celeste, she asked, can I share my interviews or my essays with you? I am open to sharing the content of my essays if you just DM me or email me, but I don't give out the full essays just because they're kind of personal. But I'm very happy to kind of give you the general idea of what I wrote about. But yeah, yeah, so I wish you guys all the absolute best of luck on your application process. Literally, if you ever need any help, please reach out. And yeah, I wish everybody such good luck in the application process. Thank you guys for attending.